Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we take the sources you send us and carve out the knowledge you need with all the context and none of the clutter. Today, we are immersing ourselves in one of the most dynamic, chaotic, and profoundly formative periods of a true American icon, Maya Angelou.
That's right. Our mission today is an intellectual expedition covering the highly concentrated 4 years between 1958 and 1962. We're guided entirely by excerpts from her powerful third autobiography, The Heart of a Woman. And this book, it tracks her really challenging transition from a performing nightclub artist to a full-fledged, politically engaged writer and organizer.
And she's moving all over the place, from the deceptive promise of California through this tumultuous political awakening in New York City, and then
Finally landing in the emerging nations of Africa. It's an incredible journey.
And before we even jump into the narrative, the sources themselves, they just give us a sense of the sheer dedication that defined her life. I mean, this is the work she dedicated to her grandson, Colin Ashanti Murphy Johnson.
Yeah, and you can see the breadth of her work just in the front matter. It's amazing.
It's unbelievable. When you stop to look at the sheer range of the literature cited, this woman was a machine. We're talking about her poetry collections like A Brave and Startling Truth and Amazing Peace, children's books like Kofi and His Magic. She even had a cookbook, Hallelujah, The Welcome Table.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? It shows she realized storytelling isn't confined to a single medium. Whether she was delivering a poem, a political statement, or, a recipe, she was always transmitting culture and wisdom.
Exactly.
But the period we're covering today, 1958 to 1962, is arguably the most pivotal for understanding why she became such a relentless creator across all those genres. I mean, she was fighting for her voice and for her life at the same time.
Absolutely. And to hook you, the listener, into the sheer life and death stakes of this transformation, we have to start with the unexpected, really shocking moments that punctuate these pages.
Yeah.
We are talking about the revelation of her mother, Vivian Baxter, carrying a concealed dark blue German Luger handgun in her purse in a racially tense hotel lobby.
No, a Luger. It's such a specific detail.
And we'll also detail Angelou's own extreme confrontation with a Harlem gang leader, a confrontation that involved her borrowing a pistol and issuing this highly specific tactical threat to protect her son.
These are not gentle literary memoirs. That's the key thing to understand. They are visceral survival stories that really underpin her later serenity.
Right.
And these survival stories, they absolutely define the core conflict of this stage of her life. She had to learn how to fight, how to organize, and how to define herself politically and personally, all while she was still, just learning how to write the stories of her experiences. It's a period of immense risk and rapid growth.
Okay, let's unpack this. We'll start in California, a place she very quickly realized was far from the promised land.
All right, so we begin in Sausalito. It's a beautiful, affluent area near San Francisco. Angelou, who is still a performer at this point, found a surprising place to live. A houseboat.
A houseboat.
Yeah, and while it was unconventional, this choice offered her something she just rarely found in mid-century America, a brief but vital respite from racial tensions.
That concept of respite is so telling, isn't it? It highlights how exhausting the constant awareness of race must have been. She notes that the isolation of the houseboat allowed her son, Guy, a chance to interact with white people who did not think of him as too exotic to need correction, nor so common as to be ignored.
I mean, what an incredibly precise observation.
It is. It's about that impossible tightrope Black people had to walk, never allowed to be fully human, always observed as either a novelty or a problem.
The houseboat offered neutrality, a rare psychological safety zone, which was profoundly crucial for Guy as he was, transitioning from childhood into adolescence. The environment just buffered him from the continuous racial microaggressions that define daily life when you're constantly being judged.
And speaking of psychological safety, this section brings Angelou's mother, Vivian Baxter, back into sharp focus. This woman is one of the most remarkable characters in all of Angelou's autobiographies. We see her making these monthly visits, dressed in absolute finery, stone marten furs, diamonds, and spike heels.
The visual is so important because it functions as both a declaration of self-worth and a profound mask. Angelou emphasizes the glamour, but she contrasts it immediately with the deeper reality, the constant consuming worry in her mother's eyes. She describes them as frightened for her baby and her baby's baby. The opulence was a shield. It was a performance of strength.
Right, designed to protect that fragile emotional core. And that maternal protection, it also manifested in very material ways. Her mother would force smiles, hold her tongue about Angelou's unconventional life choices, but she always left a specific kind of proof that she was watching out for them.
Exactly. Angelou recounts finding wads of money tucked under the pillow, or receiving checks slipped to her with a kiss goodbye. This silent financial support wasn't just aid, it was a consistent material statement that Vivian Baxter was committed to the survival of her family no matter what.
A form of silent protest against the economic pressures on a single black mother in that era.
Precisely.
So after Sausalito, Angelou moves inland to the, well, seductive but ultimately restrictive world of Laurel Canyon in 1958. She paints a picture of intense, almost decadent sensuality. Red-roofed, Moorish-style houses, the thick scent of eucalyptus, and a riot of crimsons, carnelian, pinks, fuchsia, and sunburst gold blooming everywhere.
It was designed to feel like an exclusive artistic paradise, the heart of Hollywood's residential elite. But Angelou immediately ran up against the stark color line. She observes that the few established black residents there, like singers Billy Eckstine and Billy Daniels and the actor Herb Jeffries, they were rich, famous, and critically light-skinned enough to pass, at least for Portuguese.
And she was none of those things. She was, as she describes herself, a little-known nightclub singer who was said to have more determination than talent. That contrast between the perceived glamour of her job and the very limited access she actually had, even in supposed liberal California. It's a defining moment.
Which brings that glamour crashing down into the harsh reality of housing discrimination. When she answered a for-rent ad for a bungalow, the landlord gave her the immediate rehearsed refusal. The house was taken.
Of course. And the only way she secured the modest, overpriced two-bedroom bungalow was by enlisting the help of a sympathetic white couple, Atara and Joe Morheim, who agreed to rent it on her behalf.
And the confrontation on moving day is just explosive. The moment the landlord sees Angelou, he physically recoils in shock and revulsion, snatching his hand away from Joe Morheim. But what makes this anecdote so crucial is the next turn. The landlord didn't just target Angelou with racial epithets. He immediately turned his fury onto Joe Morheim for helping her, shouting both racial and anti-Semitic slurs. "I should have known, you dirty Jew! You bastard, you!"
That detail about the anti-Semitic slurs, it just throws the intersectionality of bigotry into sharp relief. The landlord was so consumed by his own hatred that he couldn't process a simple act of human kindness without defaulting to another, entirely separate set of prejudices against his own race.
It exposes the systemic nature of it all. It's not limited to one group. It targets anyone who stands in solidarity. Joe Morheim was immediately defined as an enemy for supporting her. But that small, expensive victory was only possible through that alliance. The price of acceptance was made abundantly clear.
The price of her artistic life also came into question when she had the famous, deeply anticipated, and utterly fraught encounter with the legendary Billie Holiday. Angelou's initial reaction to the meeting was pure reverence. Of course, who wouldn't?
But the reality was devastating. When Billie arrived, Angelou notes her face was bloated, her eyes a flat, dead black, and her hand. When Angelou held it, it felt like a child's rubber toy. The physical signs of suffering were just immediate.
And the conversation went immediately to the attack. Billie, known for her sharp cynicism, challenged Angelou's career path, asking if she performed as an entertainer by showing some titty and shaking your booty.
It's an incredibly raw critique of the expectations placed on black female performers. It was a test.
A test of character. And Angelou held her ground, stating firmly that she wouldn't do that to keep a job.
And here's where we get the real aha moment of this encounter. All of Billie's hostility just vanishes the moment Guy enters the room. Guy, innocent and unvarnished, spoke directly to Billie about having read about her difficult life and police troubles.
That's the pivotal moment, isn't it?
It is. Despite having called life a bitch on wheels, just minutes earlier, the presence of the child forced a shift. Angelou observes that when Guy was present, Billie made considerable effort to form her words with distinction. The presence of respect and innocence commanded this temporary return to her own dignity.
But the difficulties in California were far from over. Angelou was fighting these external battles, but soon her son ran into trouble at the Marveland School, signaling deep institutional problems.
And this incident is a perfect illustration of how quickly systemic racism operates. Guy was pulled into the principal's office, disciplined by the principal, the counselor Mr. Baker, and 2 teachers for profanity on the school bus.
So Angelou presses Guy for the truth, and the reality was deeply innocent, and frankly, kind of hilarious in context. Guy had been reading a book and was explaining human reproduction, talking about the penis and the vagina and the womb, because the other kids were saying the funniest things. He was trying to bring science to playground gossip.
And predictably, the girls he was explaining it to, the crazy girls, as Guy called them, started crying when he explained that their fathers had done that to their mothers.
Of course.
But the faculty's reaction was not confusion or embarrassment. It was outright institutional prejudice. They stood firm on their collective racist stance. And we do not allow Negro boys to use foul language in front of our girls.
The lie. The complete denial of his intellectual curiosity was insulting, but the danger was real. Angelou realized that this prejudiced faculty would use him as a whipping boy for any perceived transgression.
So the search for community became imperative. This led her and Guy out of Laurel Canyon and into the Westlake District, a racially mixed neighborhood with Mexican, Black American, Asian, and white families. The change in Guy was just instantaneous.
His excitement was palpable. He jumped and wriggled and said, "Boy, now I'm going to make some friends."
Okay.
Westlake provided that fundamental psychological acceptance he had missed. This was the final sign that California, despite its beauty, was psychologically untenable.
And that realization that California was essentially up south propels us into our next section, where the transition east is framed by the indispensable and extremely dramatic guidance of Vivian Baxter.
Right. Vivian Baxter returns with a pivotal courage lesson in Fresno, California. Angelou called her mother asking for a visit, but her mother chose the Desert Hotel to meet, specifically because the hotel had just lifted its racial color bar.
This wasn't a social visit for Vivian Baxter. It was a high-stakes reconnaissance mission.
And she chose to test that bar with absolute theatrical defiance. She arrived in her furs, acting, as Angelou noted, as if she had been a guest there for years, demanding attention through sheer presence.
The tension in the hotel lobby was immediate and profoundly frightening, especially for Angelou. She describes the convention attendees glaring, making her feel such immediate panic she wanted to just flee back to LA.
But her mother maintained that absolute composure. When they finally sat alone, Vivian Baxter dismissed the glaring crowd by calling them so ugly they make you stop and think. She treated the oppressors as minor distractions.
And the crux of her lesson arrived when she explained the psychological strategy behind her cool demeanor. She told Maya, "Animals can sense fear. They feel it. Well, you know that human beings are animals too. Never let a person know you're frightened."
It was a primal, tactical lesson in survival.
Exactly. And then came the physical, visceral reveal that proved her strategy wasn't just swagger, but cold, hard preparation. Her mother told her that if she hadn't been there acting fearless, the whites might have turned into a mob, but something about her told them if they mess with either of us, they better start looking for some new asses, because I'd blow away what their mamas gave them.
Wow. And then she shows her.
And then she provides the literal evidence. Angelou looked into her mother's purse and discovered the dark blue German Luger handgun concealed beneath her wallet.
A Luger. It's so specific. It's a military-grade German sidearm. This wasn't a small lady's revolver. It was a powerful professional weapon.
It signaled serious intent and capability. And it demonstrated that her mother's defiance was not reckless bravado, but a willingness to meet potential violence with superior lethal force. It was strategy backed by iron preparation.
That moment just crystallizes the difference between passive endurance and active self-defense, and her own life trajectory was another kind of courage lesson.
Absolutely. Vivian Baxter demonstrated the power of reinvention. She'd been a surgical nurse, a realtor, a hotel owner, but then she suddenly decided to become a female merchant marine. She showed Angelou that your previous life does not dictate your future self.
By the time Angelou made the final decision to leave California, she was spurred by a combination of personal anxiety and political awakening. Guy was growing, becoming a tall, aloof stranger, and she felt she was losing that foundational connection they once shared. She hoped to find a niche in New York.
And this personal departure was given crucial political context by the writer, John Killens. He gave her the stinging truth. Georgia's down south. California is up south. His ultimate point was that if you are Black in America, you are never truly free. You are always on a metaphorical plantation dealing with masters.
And the only way to see the American struggle clearly was to move east and engage with the political and artistic nucleus of New York with a writer's eyes. That intense critique and the promise of a more politically charged environment set the stage for our next section. The writer's gauntlet and the call to action. This is where she officially begins the fundamental pivot of her identity.
She makes a decisive professional choice here to quit show business entirely. This meant giving up these skin-tight dresses and manicured smiles and the sentimental lyrics of a performer. She decided instead to take on the profound responsibility of making people think.
This was the moment she formally exchanged entertainment for activism.
And she found immediate inspiration in the Black artistic renaissance happening around her.
Artists who are using their medium for direct political statements. She mentions Abby Lincoln and Max Roach with their liberation jazz, Lorraine Hansberry addressing complex truths about the Black family, and of course, James Baldwin holding the country in his balled fist with the fire next time.
This collective movement fueled her ambition, leading her directly to the Harlem Writers Guild. This was a place where she faced a necessary but absolutely brutal trial by fire.
Her task was simple: read her work in progress. But the sheer terror of exposing her fragile new identity as a writer just overwhelmed her. She described her first piece as a dull play with characters that were unreal and dialogue that, in her own self-effacing humor, was taken entirely off the back of a Campbell's soup can.
And the response was precisely what she feared.
Oh, yeah. John Henrik Clarke, the brilliant, sharp-witted historian, delivered the famously harsh critique. He told the historical joke about Alexander Graham Bell inventing the telephone, and the next day some lazy playwright started his play with a phone call, implying that Angelou's work was fundamentally weak.
A critique like that could crush a new writer.
It could. But Clarke's ultimate analysis turned it from a dismissal into a powerful challenge. He followed the joke by looking directly at her and declaring, "Maya, you've got a story to tell."
That was the galvanizing force.
It was. She immediately resolved to tackle what John Killens had previously suggested was the most impossible literary form, the short story. It was an act of defiance and commitment.
The discussions at the Guild quickly moved from the pages of literature to the immediate dangers of political action. They were discussing supporting the Fair Play for Cuba organization.
And you have to remember the context. This was the early 1960s, the height of the Cold War and anti-communist paranoia, supporting Fidel Castro's Cuba. Well, it was an act of treason in the eyes of the establishment.
And John Killens understood the gravity of the decision perfectly. He warned them about the immediate risk of signing a newspaper ad. It would place their names in FBI files and instantly make them suspect to the government.
To drive the point home, Killens recounted the powerful, deeply embarrassing anecdote of the slave Tom. Tom worked for years to save up enough money to buy his own freedom. When his master finally agreed to sell it to him for $600, a low price, Tom refused. He said, "Boss, freedom is a little too high right now. I'm going to wait till the price come down."
The collective laughter that anecdote elicited was described as acrid with embarrassment. Why such a sharp reaction?
Because the story forced every writer in the room to confront their own compromises, it made them admit that there had been occasions when the price of freedom, whether in risk or money or safety, felt too high, and they had, in effect, waited for the price to come down.
And that self-recognition was a powerful catalyst for action. It manifested almost immediately in the creation of the Cabaret for Freedom, a fundraising review for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC.
Right. This was after Angelou heard Martin Luther King Jr. speak. And King wasn't talking about peaceful progress. He was describing a new, more violent and ugly South. So Angelou, Godfrey Cambridge, and Hugh Hurd partnered up based on this, almost youthful fantasy that they could put on a gloriously successful show and raise serious money with almost no resources.
And their immense talent secured them a slot at the legendary Apollo Theater. Working with musicians like Willie Bobo and Mongo Santa Maria, she was nervous. The manager, Schiffman, even warned her, no audience participation in the Apollo.
But the audience reaction quickly overcame any management rules. When Angelou performed a deep Southern blues, the Black audience shouted back, "Tell the truth, baby!" Then she sang the Cuban religious song Baba Fururu, and the audience instantly connected, bridging that gap between the African-American struggle and the global movement.
The emotional climax arrived with the encore. Uhuru, the Swahili word for freedom. The audience, now united in what Angelou calls centuries of belonging, sang along with a passion that transcended language, understanding the song beyond my own understanding.
It was an incredible moment where Angelou realized she had become the ignition, setting off this communal fire. The show was such an explosive success that Sidney Poitier was reportedly seen standing on a table.
Wow. But the success led directly to the critical yet unglamorous realization of organizational reality. The sheer energy of the cabaret had to be channeled into action.
Right. When they offered the SCLC the valuable mailing list generated by the show, Stanley Levison lamented that the small, paid SCLC staff was completely swamped. They couldn't handle the data.
Which meant that if they wanted to capitalize on their own success, they had to do the mundane office work themselves.
The mimeographing, the snuffing envelopes, working the phones, this was the shift from artist to organizer. Angelou, Godfrey, and Hugh realized they couldn't just perform their way to liberation.
And this led to her crucial lasting insight. No race could sing and dance its way to freedom.
She was forced to learn practical skills and, more importantly, how to hold a fractious group of volunteers together. The revolution she learned required detailed paperwork.
The cabaret closed, and Angelou took a singing job in Chicago, which brings us directly into our next section and the extreme life-or-death stakes back home in Harlem.
And this section reveals the incredible maternal ferocity Angelou was willing to employ to protect her son, who was desperately trying to claim his own autonomy in a hostile environment.
While Angelou was in Chicago, Guy, who was only 14 but insisted I'm a man, got into a territorial fight with the local Harlem gang, the Savages, over a girl named Susie.
When John Killens found Guy, the teenager was not running. He was prepared for war. Guy had collected all of his mother's butcher knives and stuck them into the delicate lace curtain at the front door, waiting for the gang's inevitable return. His philosophy was heartbreakingly clear. I'm not going to run, because once you do, you have to keep on running.
That image of the shining knives protruding through the lace curtain is so powerful. It just symbolizes the vulnerability and the desperate self-assertion of a boy fighting for his small piece of turf.
It really does. And Angelou, assessing the situation, realized she needed a solution more permanent than Killens' temporary intervention. She correctly assessed the Savages as young black men who had been successfully convinced by society that they were ultimately worthless.
Her response was not an appeal to the police or the authorities. It was extreme, targeted, and highly personal. She borrowed a pistol from her musician lover in Manhattan and tracked down the gang leader, Jerry.
And the ensuing confrontation is one of the most chilling in the entire book. Angelou delivered a direct, calculated threat. She told Jerry, "If my son comes home with a black eye or a torn shirt, I won't call the police. I will come over here and shoot Susie's grandmother first, then her mother, then I'll blow away that sweet little baby."
The specificity of the threat is what makes it so terrifying and effective. She wasn't threatening Jerry. She was threatening the most vulnerable, non-combatant women and children in his own family.
She was leveraging the societal expectation that black women, as mothers, were protectors, but she inverted the typical response. She made it clear she would resort to untraceable familial violence, circumventing the legal system that offered her no true justice.
And Jerry's stunned recognition confirms the effectiveness of her tactical ferocity. "For a mother, I must say you're a mean motherfucker." That comment is just a pure acknowledgement of her lethal intent and determination.
Absolutely. So after surviving that high-stakes period, Angelou naturally sought stability. She decided to marry Thomas Allen, a bail bondsman, specifically for quiet security.
Their relationship was defined by generosity, comfortable sex, and good food, but she admits it was noticeably lacking conversation. She confessed she wasn't in love, but she was profoundly lonely and exhausted.
She was fantasizing about a retreat, moving to Long Island, letting her hair grow out, joining the church, looking like a nice colored woman from San Francisco.
A momentary surrender to the allure of a normal, peaceful life.
But before that quiet life could solidify, Vusumzi Make, the Pan-African Congress representative, was introduced at a party at John Killens' house. Vusumzi Make needs some definition here. He was a leading figure in the Pan-African Congress, a powerful anti-apartheid liberation movement in South Africa. He was an intellectual, a revolutionary, and a political exile. His entire identity was chaos and ambition.
And the contrast between Vusumzi's revolutionary ambition and Thomas Allen's desire for quiet security was immense. Movement's intention was stated bluntly upon meeting her. "I intend to change your life. I am going to take you to Africa."
That promise of moving beyond the plantation of America was irresistible to her developing political identity. When Angelou finally gathered the courage to break up with Thomas, she tried to smooth the exit by lying, telling him she was going to a conference to explain the philosophy of nonviolence.
Thomas, of course, saw through the lie instantly. His response was furious, deeply possessive, and racially charged. "You got another nigger," he accused, escalating his verbal assault by calling her a goddamn fey girl.
And denouncing Martin Luther King as another black-ass nigger. The tension just culminates in this truly terrifying demonstration of his own definition of power and control.
He pulled out his gun. not threatening Angelou, but pointing it across the street at a lone, unsuspecting black woman, and he stated chillingly, "I could blow that broad's head off, and I wouldn't do a day."
This act solidified the end of that chapter. Thomas was demonstrating his raw, untethered power, unbound by law or morality. Angelou realized she had hurt his ego, but not his heart, and that she was blessed to have escaped intact.
And that leads us straight into our next section, plunging us into the maelstrom of global activism in New York City, demonstrating that the struggle was far wider than the American South.
This section begins with the profound international tragedy of the murder of Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Congo, who was killed by forces backed by Western powers in early 1961. This murder just galvanized Black activists in New York.
The Cultural Association for Women of African Heritage, or CALOH, which Angelou was a part of, planned a solemn, silent, veiled, and mournful demonstration at the United Nations.
But the planned silent protest was completely overwhelmed. Thousands of Black people, fueled by collective rage over the assassination of an African hero, surged to the UN, chanting, "Lumumba, Lumumba."
The protest quickly spiraled into a riot. Angelou recounts the chaos of screaming, shouting, "Murderers!" and the specific damning insult hurled at the delegates. "You Ku Klux Klan motherfuckers!"
The disorder was extravagant, fueled by genuine righteous rage, but the chaos was so intense that Angelou herself was momentarily incapacitated. She describes her knees weakening, sitting down in the nearest seat, completely immobilized by personal fear.
She was pulled to safety by a stranger named Buddy. After getting her away from the police, he offered a profound observation that cut through all the political jargon. He told her, "Sister, in this country, a Negro is always about to get killed, so that ain't nothing."
Buddy's statement brought the theoretical danger of political protest back to the omnipresent, mundane danger of being Black in America. The whole thing was over in 20 minutes, but Angelou had experienced a level of panic that, for the first time, immobilized her.
In the aftermath, Angelou and Rosa Guy met with Malcolm X at his restaurant. This was a critical meeting of competing philosophies of activism.
The effect of meeting Malcolm X face-to-face was shocking. Angelou felt his aura was too bright, his eyes like burning embers, and his voice a Black baritone and musical. He was a magnetic, intimidating force of nature.
And he offered them a blunt, unvarnished critique of their UN demonstration. He told them they were wrong in your direction because Muslims do not demonstrate, and that shouting and carrying placards will not win freedom for anyone.
His perspective was intensely tactical. The rage was justified, he implied, but the execution was flawed and ineffective in securing actual power. This left Angelou and Rosa in a fog of defeat.
Despite the organizational setbacks, Angelou moved to her next artistic endeavor, acting in Jean Genet's challenging play The Blacks. Vussmaek immediately endorsed this, seeing its political utility.
Voss argued that the play was crucial because it confronted the real psychological trap facing revolutionaries. It suggested that Black revolutionaries often don't truly seek fundamental change, but rather exchange, meaning they simply want to take the place of the oppressors.
But the play quickly brought back the specter of professional exploitation. Angelou and her co-star Ethel Ayler had to quickly compose 2 songs after Max Roach pulled his music from the show on opening night. They were effective and clever, working fast to compose the songs in the key of C.
They proved their professional worth, but when they tried to get paid for their original creative labor from the producer, Sidney Bernstein, the exploitation was blatant and insulting.
Bernstein gave them an insipid little smile and flatly refused to pay, saying dismissively, "You didn't compose anything, you just sat down at the piano and made up something."
That denial of their creative labor, their intellectual property, was devastating. And this denial triggered Voss's dramatic intervention and assertion of control. Angelou was devastated backstage, feeling forced into accepting the insult. Voss took charge, forbidding her return to the theater.
He found the nearest Western Union office and sent a definitive telegram to the producer. "Mrs. Maya Angelou Make will not be returning to the Blacks or the St. Mark's Playhouse. She resists the exploitation of herself and her people. She has closed."
This was a revolutionary act of asserting dignity and control over her own labor, but it also served as a subtle warning sign. Voss was increasingly blurring the line between protecting her political identity and controlling her personal life.
The chaos in New York continued right up until their departure. Not long after this, sheriff's deputies arrived at their Manhattan apartment, armed and solemn, tacking an eviction notice on the door for non-payment of rent.
Angelou learned they had to be out in 24 hours. Vus, who had great political power but little apparent domestic acumen, seemed completely disconnected from the reality of their imminent homelessness. He insisted, I have a lot of money, so there's nothing to worry about.
The moment of realization and the shift in the family dynamic came not from Vus, but from Guy. When Vus was gone, Guy emerged, worried, and embraced his mother, saying, "It'll be okay, Mom. We'll live through this one too."
That moment reversed the parental dynamic. Angelou realized her teenager was growing up, stepping into the role of emotional provider and support. Vus eventually returned, arranged the sale of the furniture, and rented a musty furnished apartment for 3 weeks before they left for Egypt.
And with that final chaotic jump, Angelou, Guy, and Vusomzi Make are off to Africa, landing in Cairo in 1962, which begins our next section.
Right. And Cairo in 1962 immediately presented a sensory overload that was both exhilarating and exhausting. Angelou described the streets as a visual and a tonal symphony of chaos. Camels, goats, sleek limousines, shouting children, making it feel like living in a year-long Mardi Gras.
But the excitement quickly dissolved into a harsh financial reality that mirrored their debt problems in New York. Angelou discovered the massive concealed debt Vos had accrued. Rent arrears, overdue payments for furniture and linen. The specter of the New York sheriff's deputy had truly followed them.
Fortunately, a fellow Black American expatriate, David Dubois, who was a journalist there, helped her secure a job as associate editor at the Arab Observer.
This professional opportunity, however, immediately provoked Vos's deep anger and controlling nature. He demanded she quit the job, calling her attempt foolish and showing the arrogance of the American. He insisted she was an African wife who must stay home.
This was the first major defining marital conflict, centering on her professional identity versus his patriarchal expectation. And Maya held her ground using a shrewd, tactical argument. She pointed out that Dr. Nadati, the editor and a friend of Gamal Abdel Nasser, knew she was Vus's wife. She argued that quitting would reflect badly on your name.
By invoking his political repute, the one thing Vus truly valued, she forced him to back down. This was a crucial victory for her.
And she accepted the challenge of the job, plunging into a new world of journalism and African politics she knew nothing about. This led to her famous Brer Rabbit moment.
Right, she was totally unqualified, felt overwhelmed, and was surrounded by crowded bookshelves of unfamiliar history and politics in the library. But then she had the realization, referencing the famous folk tale where Brer Rabbit begs the farmer not to throw him into the briar patch, which is secretly his home.
The hardship, the dense, difficult intellectual challenge of the Egyptian library and newsroom, that was her briar patch. She smiled, realizing that the difficulty was precisely where she needed to be to grow. She felt, home at last. Great God Almighty, I'm home at last.
But the marital conflicts quickly came to a profound head over Vus's persistent infidelity. The local African diplomatic community, concerned over Vus's reputation, staged a secret intervention.
Masquerading as a surprise birthday party, but it was actually a high-stakes, secret trial, a marital palaver, called to prevent her from leaving Ves. Her friends, Banti and Kebi, sat with straight, flat faces, refusing to acknowledge her private complaints, forcing her to air her grievances publicly.
When asked why she found Vus impossible, Angelou was brutally, devastatingly honest in front of the assembled diplomats and wives. The man studs his thing in any opening he finds. I am faithful, he is not.
And she then added a tactical political move designed to gain the audience's sympathy. She said, I slave my ass off.
She knew that mentioning the word slave in front of an African audience whose forefathers may have sold people into slavery would give her an edge against Vis.
She was performing for her life, using her history and political context as a weapon. She was ultimately persuaded to stay for 6 months, not because she was convinced of Vus's virtue, but to protect his repute. This led to Vus's formal, shocking defense of his unfaithfulness. His argument was a stunning piece of patriarchal rhetoric, he argued. A man requires a certain amount of sexual gratification, much more than a woman needs, wants, or understands, and that as an African man, he had the right to marry more than one woman.
He claimed sex was only for pleasure and release, not the factor holding a family together. This argument was the final erosion of their bond.
And the ultimate public confrontation came with Mendina, one of Vos's known affairs. Vos invited Mendina to their house under the false pretense of a job opening, a transparent, cruel effort to humiliate Maya publicly.
Angelou refused to be humiliated. She gathered every shred of her skill, art, and craftiness, the performance skills she honed in California, and approached Mendina.
She used soft, haughty words, asking Mendina if she was willing to work for a high salary. When Mendina, thinking she was about to secure a lucrative job, answered yes, Angelou delivered the final, calculated blow. Unfortunately, the job has been filled, but if it had not, dear Mendina, you would never do. You are ignorant and you are a tramp.
A tactical, ruthless public humiliation of the other woman, allowing Angelou to save face and walk away with her dignity intact. It proved she had learned how to fight Vos's tactics with her own sophisticated psychological warfare.
After 5 tumultuous months in Cairo, Angelou made the final decision to leave Vos, securing her path to independence in our final section.
Angelou confided in Joe Williamson, the librarian chargé d'affaires, who had clearly been expecting the collapse of the marriage. He immediately helped her secure a job in the Liberian Department of Information.
The goal now was Accra, Ghana, the heart of Pan-Africanism. And when she arrived there in 1962, the scene was one of intense joy and profound political significance.
She describes a sight that was impossible to comprehend in the segregated United States. She saw black pilots and black officers in positions of power, noting black captains. It was 1962. In our country, the only black man in our airports fueled planes. Ghana was visual evidence that the revolution Vos spoke of was real.
However, almost immediately, this new life was threatened by a serious accident. Guy was excited about a picnic he was attending with 2 friends, Richard and Ellen.
Later, Ellen arrived at the house, tousled and covered with blood, screaming, "It wasn't our fault, he's still alive!" Guy had been driving the car, having taken over from a drunk Richard. His injuries were severe: a broken arm, a broken leg, and possible internal injuries.
This tragedy immediately forced Angelou to cancel her planned move to Liberia. She secured a new job teaching and moved into an instructor's house on the University of Ghana campus. For 3 months, she cooked Guy daily meals, returning to the purest, most stable form of motherhood, primary care and survival.
The arc of this entire transformative period culminates here, with Guy's physical recovery and his final, powerful act of emancipation.
Guy registered for the university, ready to move into Mensa Sarba Hall. He was taller than his mother now, wearing a cowl-like cast covering his head and shoulders from the operations.
The final, decisive interaction came when Angelou stopped him from carrying his old trunk, worrying about his neck and his fresh injuries. She was trying one last time to protect him.
And Guy looked at her, his face quiet and his voice calm, delivering the absolute thematic conclusion of this entire journey. He told her, "It is my neck and my life. I will live it whole or not at all."
That is the moment of definitive freedom for both of them. The teenager had become a fully realized man, demanding his own risk and his own autonomy. His final loving assessment to his mother was perhaps the most liberating statement she received in these 4 years. Maybe now you'll have a chance to grow up.
That sentence just wraps up the entire narrative. Her ability to grow to finally be fully Maya Angelou was fundamentally contingent on her son finally claiming his own life. This act freed her from the exhausting, all-consuming necessity of being solely mom, the gun-toting protector, and allowed her to dedicate herself fully to her political and intellectual identity.
To synthesize this incredible 4-year period, let's look at the skills Angelou acquired. California taught her tactical survival. New York forced her to transition from performer to political organizer. And Cairo taught her professional independence.
The central insight remains the transformation of the key relationships. The journey began with the literal necessity of her mother's protection, a Luger tucked away in a purse. It ends with the necessity of her son's demand for full independence, which finally gave Angelou the space she needed to thrive intellectually and emotionally. She moved from receiving protection to being free to define her own risk.
The entire narrative is a testament to the pursuit of freedom. Not just the abstract political freedom she organized for, but the personal, intellectual, and physical freedom from external control, whether that control came from a racist landlord, an exploitative producer, a possessive husband, or even the suffocating anxiety of necessary motherhood.
And that leads to a provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over. The title of the book is The Heart of a Woman, detailing Angelou's constant struggle to protect and fight for others. We see that her biggest personal breakthrough required releasing the one person she fought hardest for, so it raises the question, what protective role or dependent relationship are you holding on to today, a responsibility that, while necessary in the past, might now be preventing you from claiming your full intellectual and emotional independence?
A profound thought to consider as you reflect on your own path. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Maya Angelou's journey to self-definition and freedom. We'll see you next time.